Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of the Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by saltwater guide David Blinken. David shares his journey to the salt, his fishery off of Long Island, and some of the challenges it's facing today. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to this episode's sponsor. This episode's sponsored by our friends at Norvise. Their motto is, tie better flies faster, and they produce the only vise that truly spins. The holidays and show season are just around the corner. Head over to www.nor-vice.com today to find the perfect gift for the tire on your list. And if you'll be in the Somerset, New Jersey area on November 11th or 12th, swing by the International Fly Tying Symposium and spend some time with the great folks at Norvise. Now, on to our interview. Well, David, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and we have a tradition on the Articulate Fly. We like to ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Wow, my earliest fishing memory is might be in a backyard pond when I was, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years old, and I was rummaging through a closet in a den, and I found all these long, skinny things with reels, and I had no idea what to do with it. And so my father put one together for me and took me into the backyard, and I could see fish swimming along. And I think one of my first casts, I got a largemouth, and no pun intended, I was hooked after that. And you never forget the first of a fish you ever catch, and that one I remember as clear as day, even though I was 6 years old.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
The dark side. There is no dark side of fly fishing, really. I mean, fly fishing is, it's kind of the melding of art and sport and anything you can do with the fly rod if you really are truly committed to it is sort of a wonderful thing. Some people just, they're fly rodding versus fly fishing, using, going for, doing bait and switch. Other people are doing, using sinking lines. Some people who dry fly fish are like dry or die. It's all good. It's all good. There's no dark side. It's all the light.
Yeah, and so you've been walking on the path for a while fly fishing. Who are some of the folks that mentored you on your fly fishing journey, and what have they taught you?
It's really interesting. I can't really pick out a mentor per se, but there's a couple of people in my mind who really stand out, who really influenced me, and probably first and foremost over the years would have been Captain Eddie Whiteman down in Isla Morada. Or I think Eddie lives in Tavernier now. But, the first time I tarpon fished with him and my father, I learned more in those first 5 days with Eddie than I think I learned collectively my previous 28 years of life. It was just an incredible learning experience. I mean, I've been using a fly rod since I was 6 years old. And I had a lot of experiences, and I'm doing different things. But there were certain nuances that I don't think I fully grasped, and probably more saltwater wise than freshwater wise. And wow, Eddie really drove it home. It was pretty incredible. And I remember saying, "I'm going to do this for a living," and Eddie said, "Don't say that on the boat with me. Your father will never hire me again." I'll never forget that. I was laughing hysterically.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you and I are roughly of the same vintage, and so we kind of had to learn this stuff kind of pre-internet.
Absolutely. I mean, I was lucky. I got to way back. I got a little experience fishing with Al Kuti, and Al and I, were friendly. Lou Tavery, these are people who you're lucky enough to meet over the years. You know, Fished with me, and some of us went and got our Federation of Fly Fishing Casting certification. The organization has a different name now. IFF, but and Lou taught me a couple of things, and we'd stayed in touch over the years, on and off. But I would say, my greatest, probably not having a mentor, but being a guide. All the feedback you get as a guide from being with different people every day, that's invaluable. That taught me more about how to fish, more how to work with people, more how to sort of open my mind up to different things in fly fishing than any one person I've ever had teaching me things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was spent a little bit of time visiting with a friend who was running a guide school this past weekend in Western North Carolina, and we were talking about that kind of constraint of having to fish through someone else who may not be, the type of angler you are, and like how that actually helps you become a much better angler and a much better teacher.
Yeah, I mean, as a guide, you're on the back of the boat. I like to be on a push pole more than anything when I'm guiding. Some people guide out of boats and use electrics and stuff like that, but there's a certain intimacy that you get being on pole and working with people, and you it's a team. Fly fishing, shallow water fly fishing. Um, as a guide it's really the most cooperative thing you can do, and you really need to gel quickly with your angler in the bow, and once you make that connection with the angler, however you figure out how to make that connection, once all those things sort of fall into place, it gets very exciting, and people are learning and people are feeling each other, and communication gets easier. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's neat you say that because I always, want to, when I fish with a guide, I always want to be an extension of them and be able to, do what, they've done all this work to put me on the fish, and I want to be able to kind of execute. So I think when that happens, it's pretty killer.
It is. Someone once said to me, "You're doing all the fishing. All I'm doing is casting the rod." and I thought that was kind of interesting. It was sort of telling, but sure, I'd love to feel the fish tug the line, but boy, it's really gratifying to make people happy and to give them a great day out there. And they get off the boat and they're all smiles, and you know and they're going to have a good night's sleep because they caught a few fish, and they got to see things they might not normally see. I mean, I literally got off my skiff like 40 minutes before you and I got on tonight, and we fished until sunset tonight. It was a tough day. It was a really tough day, and we're fighting, trying to find fish earlier in the day, and we had sort of an incoming tide that was really slow to stop and really slow to get going. Fall, and finally at around 3:30, things started to happen, and then we got into the tiny little backwater where maybe went into a creek. The creek couldn't have been more than 15, 20 feet wide. And all of a sudden, we've got waves of stripers coming out. And it all came together in that one moment. And we had stripers up in the grass, and they're feeding on, I don't know what they were feeding on, shrimp. I could see some bait fish jumping out. And I mean, both of us, when we came back from this experience, me and my sport Steve, we just were both completely sated and elated all at the same time. It was incredible.
Yeah, that's really neat. And, we had a really great conversation kind of planning the interview. And, one of the things we talked about was, how fishing became a safe place for you when you were growing up. And I was wondering if you would mind kind of sharing what you meant by that with our listeners.
Sure. I mean, you know, we all have, so many people have issues. One one way or another. I had the unfortunate or fortunate experience growing up of having a severe learning disability. And I feel for a lot of people. Now they call it learning differences. When I was growing up, it was dyslexia or learning disability or however they want to call it. It doesn't matter. But, it takes away your confidence that you can't read. And I couldn't really read until I was in seventh grade. But I had a particular intelligence for the outdoors. And there's this great psychologist named Gardner, and Gardner talks about multiple intelligences and, math smart and, nature smart and all these different things. Anyway, I guess I had the nature smart one, and I felt very at home in the outdoors. And fishing, I really capitalized on, and it gave me the confidence to keep pushing forward to learn how to read and kind of stay out of trouble. And it was something to look forward to. And, if if I didn't have fishing, and also another sport that I really enjoy, skiing. If I didn't have those things, boy, I can't imagine what kind of a person I would have been growing up, not having those kind of outlets. And I was very fortunate that I was able to experience those, because people who are impoverished or just don't know what direction they want to go in, may not have those opportunities. I'm very grateful that I did, and so I try to give back as often as I can, because I had those opportunities, and I was allowed to fish. It was just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and was that kind of the germ or the foundation of your desire to become a guide, kind of being able to share that piece with other people?
I think so. I think it didn't really formulate in my head till college. It you love it and you want to do it all the time. And when you're really young, you don't know that you can do it for a living. And then, you watch things like American Sportsman or Chasing Silver or stuff like that. And that came well after I was, more mature. I had already been a guy by the time that came out. But, things like you're watching American Sportsman and Mark Soth and Saltwater Journal and stuff like that. And you're like 8, 9, and 10 years old. And you're like, well, these guys are guides. And they're making money at it. That's kind of cool. And by the time I got to college, I realized it's something maybe I do want to do, but I would never say it out loud, because like everybody in my family were these incredible overachievers. And, far be it for me to be a fishing guide when everybody else is doing much more, heady things. But eventually, I closed my eyes and said, what is it that you really want to do after, having a couple of failed careers and not really liking the direction I'm going? And I was like, yeah, get back to your roots, do what you love, don't make it, don't make it recreation, make it a vocation.
Yeah, because I think you started your guide service, when you were 29 or 30, something like that?
I think something like that, 1996. And I did a little guiding up on the Delaware for El Cucci for a couple of springs. And, I like the trout thing and I like guiding up there, but I really kind of wanted to do my own thing. And I was very close to saltwater. That was really a lot of the fishing I did. My grandparents lived, two of my grandparents lived on Martha's Vineyard, and I spent a lot of time growing up there and loved the fishing there. And long before, I was in Long Island too with my parents, but I was really influenced by the fishing in Martha's Vineyard in so many different ways. That did bring me, eventually it brought me home, as I would say, to what I do now.
And do you mind sharing a little bit more about your journey and kind of how you got to the jumping off place when you were 29 or 30?
Yeah. I had been, I before that I was, an assistant producer in advertising, and then I started producing and directing some smaller commercials. And I just, I kind of was tiring of being in the office and all those, pressures, not self-driven pressures, but pressures, outside pressures to do certain things. And I think maybe my learning disability may have had an effect on me there. But um, so I stopped doing that, and I worked at Orvis for a while, and then I moved on to Eddie Bauer, where they had me helping run something called the Sport Shop division, and I was doing that in the East Coast for them. And while I was doing that, I was taking my Coast Guard exam. I was like, I just can't be in a store. I left advertising because I didn't want to be in an office, and being in a store was almost as bad, even though it was a wonderful company to work for when I did. And so I started getting my Coast Guard license, and then one summer I bought a boat, and I sort of stuck my toe in the water, saying, "Let me see if this is going to work." And by my second summer, I was already 75, 80% booked for between May and the end of October. And I was like, this is going to work. So one day I walked into Eddie Bauer and I said, thank you. It's been a nice ride, but this is what I'm doing full time. And I wish I'd just taken the 65 sick days that I didn't know I had.
Yeah, you could have scouted a little bit more water, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But that kind of, that was sort of it. And there was, a little bit of emotional pushing on my part. Certain things don't come easy for me, and change is not always so easy. But I always, like in my life, I always hit these little doorways where I'm like, you got to go through it. If you don't, you're going to regret it.
Yeah. And how did it feel when you kind of realized that you had kind of connected those dots and you were able to kind of align your life with your passion?
You know what? I was super happy. It gave me a sense of freedom and emotional freedom. Um, and here you are, you're finally doing what you love to do. And, some people get to do it earlier in life. For me, it was, it was around age 29, 30. And, and, and I just said to myself, wow, I'm so lucky to be here. And I don't think I've ever worked harder in my life than when I finally started to become a guide and really appreciate how lucky I was.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal thing. I mean, I think, it's always kind of amazed me to be around really talented people that didn't feel like they had very much agency over their lives.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
basically, spend your entire career doing something you really don't like. When if you could just kind of muster the courage up and make it happen, you could do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. It's like, when you're working like in an ad agency or something, people, I think this is the thing for me. I think people lack transparency. And people are always holding things very close to the vest. And when you're trying to work like in an ad agency, if you're doing something right, it would be nice for somebody it doesn't, it's not reality, but it'd be nice for somebody to tell you did a good job. But if you're doing something wrong, it would be nice for someone to just come up and kind of put their hand on your shoulder and say, why don't you try changing this, and you'll be much better. And I think it's such a cutthroat world out there in many ways. People just don't want to do that. Um, and you find yourself kind of, floating in space, not knowing what direction to go because somebody wasn't willing to, give you the proper direction. So even then, I mean, I had a wonderful person who I worked for in advertising who aim to be as close to a mentor as possible, but I just didn't get the full benefit of it. Um, but I would say, going full circle back to the mentor thing, I would say every single client I've ever had has been a mentor because of what I learned from, as I said earlier, what I learned from all these different people, and it just made me a much better guide. And And I would say maybe, I don't know if I'm a good guide, but I can tell you in my heart and in my head, I'm better. I'm better today than I was yesterday. And I was better yesterday than I was the day before, and so on. I mean, the learning process is ever going, and it just doesn't stop. And each day is a different experience. I mean, the fifth rule, we're just out there trying to have a little fun with them. So, you know, you get out there and you're with a client, and they may be in a certain mood. You might be in a certain mood. The fish are always in a certain mood, and you're just, you're picking up all these things as you go along, and it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, I think that, that posture of curiosity and kind of hunger is so incredibly important, right?
Yeah.
To not be, some of my old work colleagues, we used to joke about the race to the sofa, right? And I think that way to be in the world can lead to some, can be incredibly frustrating, right? I think you and I talked the last time we spoke to prep for the interview about, when you do things that way, a lot of days the wind is blowing really, really hard in your face, but every now and then you get some wind at your back and it feels pretty good.
It does. It does. I mean, both metaphorically and literally. I mean, as I said earlier, we were having a really tough day today. And finally, I just pulled the plug on what we were doing. I said, we're going somewhere else. And, we had a dead low tide in the evening. And I went way up into a creek, dragging the belly of my boat. And here we are finding fish. Don't be afraid to try something new or experiment. I mean, when you have, enough confidence in your ability, and when you have that confidence, it allows you to try new things or go to places where, normally there's not fish here on this tide, but let's see what happens. And we went back there half an hour before sunset, and we really got rewarded. It was quite an experience, and I think, I can say that about tonight, but I can say that about a lot of things. For example, every so often I'll have a client who I fish with a lot, and I'll say to him, you want to do the usual, or do you want to go someplace different? Do you want to try new places and new gear and new flies? And I love it when they're open minded, and we kind of connect on that level. And you're not always successful, but you always have a great time.
Yeah, and I think to kind of go with that curiosity too, cultivating that posture, and it's really difficult, I think, in today's environment to learn how to fail quickly.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the one thing that happens when you do fail quickly is it's just like striking out in baseball. Don't let that one time at the plate get you down. You've got many more. You got many more times to get up to the plate and bat today. So if you fail quickly today, or you fail quickly in the morning, just shake it off and get back there, and get the bat in your hand and start swinging again. You got 3 strikes and 4 balls. Take advantage of all of them.
But yeah, most good hitters are hitting, in the 300s. So there you go.
That's right. And all those 300 hitters strike out every game. They either pop out or strike out every game, but they're still batting 300. So that says something. They just shake it off. You have trips every season where you might get the skunk, and people who know fishing know that can happen. And unfortunately, in striper fishing here in the Northeast, it might be happening more and more to some people, because the numbers of bass have just dropped precipitously. But with enough experience and enough time on the water, that even with lower numbers of fish, those experiences happen fewer and fewer times.
Yeah. And also too, I wanted to get back to the mentorship thing, because it's one of those things that I'm absolutely obsessed about. Right. And I think it's,
Yeah.
I think it's an absolute force multiplier. I think, I think being generous with your time with people that want to learn is like one of the greatest things you can. I mean, it's really kind of the most valuable thing you can give is your time, right?
Yeah. I worked with a group in New York. Actually, helped start it, but I didn't really help start it. But I was on the ground floor, called Veteran Anglers of New York, and a good friend of mine, two friends of mine, Rich and Tamar Franklin, started it. And I got a call from them, and they said, we need some casting instructors, and I was like, count me in. And we were working with veterans with PTSD. And we were using fly casting as the vehicle to get them through that. And eventually we started taking some of these people on trips. And I remember one trip we took them, I don't know, 6 or 7 of these guys to the Bahamas bone fishing. And there was one there was one particular guy, Andy. And Andy, if you're listening, it's you. And we took them fishing, forget the Bahamas, we took them fishing out of Montauk, and we had an all day long blitz of albies and stripers. And he said to me at the end of the day, which I couldn't relate to, but I understood. He said when his adrenaline went off fishing that day, he said it was almost like being under fire when he was in the Middle East. And I was like, what? He was like, it's crazy. Uh, you know, just, the hair was up on the back of my neck. I felt the excitement, like everything was just crackling. And I was like, really? And he was like, yes. And I couldn't relate to the, under fire thing, but I could relate to the excitement of the moment. And, we had, teaching them how to cast was one thing. Teaching them how to appreciate being in the moment fishing, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And kind of curious, David, too, kind of how did the salt win your heart over freshwater?
It's it's hard to say. I still love freshwater, and I think I just keep freshwater for me. I think you know I've had a. It's not that I've had negative experiences freshwater fishing, but when you're on the stream or on a river, you can't always be alone. And there's times when I've been working a glide or a riffle in a nice run, and where it tails out, very often that's sort of the sweet spot. But you want to work your way down to these sweet spots. And I'll be out on the river, and people just like walk right out into the middle as they can see us working our way down. And I'm just like, wow, why did you do that? I'm with somebody, and we're clearly working our way down, to the tail out of this thing, and you just walk right in. And this happened to me a whole number of times. It even happens to me personally, when I'm fishing, and it, I think it's just I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. They just don't know any better, and it takes time on the water before you develop proper etiquette. Um, so I was like, all the times I've been saltwater fly fishing, I've just been out there alone. I can get away from it all. Um, and my experiences in Martha's Vineyard, growing up as a kid, very comfortable in the salt. It was sort of a natural evolution for me. And I still love trout fishing and largemouth bass fishing and doing that. But I'll do that for me, because if somebody walks into my pool and I'm alone, it doesn't bother me. If I'm guiding somebody, I might get very upset, and I don't want that to happen. And in saltwater, I can just pull the boat in another direction and get away from somebody if they're in my way, or someplace, or somebody drives the boat onto a flat that I'm on. I can just pay them no mind and just put my motor down and drive somewhere else and find another place. So yeah, yeah, and it's a certain amount of freedom on the saltwater. Um, you know,
Yeah, I'll confess I walk quite a bit to get away from people when I'm fishing for trout.
Yeah. I mean, I've been known, like, this past summer I'm visiting my dad in Idaho, and I'm fishing all the usual spots. And finally, there were a whole bunch of people in a few spots I wanted to go to. So finally drove my car to a trailhead and walked a mile and a half upriver where I knew nobody would be. And I had a beautiful, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile long stretch of river where there was not another person. And I got to catch a few fish.
Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. And I understand too that you sort of developed an expertise kind of in Long Island and kind of up around Martha's Vineyard for chasing fish on the flats. How did that come about?
Well, when I started my business, um, I was based out of the Hamptons in Long Island. I'm very fortunate enough that there's a family home here, so I could base my business out of here. And I, even though my grandparents are long gone, I was still spending time up in Martha's Vineyard. Um, but I really started to study the water differently in Long Island. And it was post moratorium, and there were loads and loads. You could pretty much go anywhere you wanted on the east end of Long Island in the mid to early '90s, and walk away with loads of fish every day. It really was not a huge effort to find fish, um, and because there were so many fish, it kind of allowed you to just go far and wide and just fish in places that you might not even think there'd be fish, and 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 that experience of that kind of freedom, because the numbers were so huge, allowed me to get into, you know, study tides, water temperatures, water depths, figure out some of the spawning areas that stripers spawn in, because we do have a local spawning population of fish out here. It's kind of been decimated over the past 10 years, but I was able to locate some spawning areas where I was able to find some really big fish in some really small places. And doing all that in a skiff on a pole on the pole really gives you a more intimate understanding. I'm not just out there drifting in rips, you know. Um, I would say 90% of the fishing I do is probably within 100 feet of shore, or maybe even 50 feet, and that really gives you an intimate understanding of the area you're fishing and how to fish it. And of course, time on the water is everything. So I started in 1996, and now it's 2023, soon to be 2024. And um, as much as I've learned here, I'm still learning. Um, it's just taking the time to understand, and don't be quick. I say to a lot of my clients who are casting, I say very often when they're rushing their cast, rushing is a waste of time because the cast will fall apart. And same thing about learning an area and how to fish it. Rushing through is a waste of time. You sometimes have to take the time to really feel it out and look really closely, look deeply. I don't know if that explains it to you, but that's how I approach it.
No, I mean, I get it. And, it's an interesting thing. And, I find probably, I don't know, gosh, maybe in the last 5 to 7 years, I'm a much more patient angler, right? In the sense of, I've never been a fish counter, right? But I'm, there are so many other things other than just catching the fish that make the day special.
Hmm.
And just learning things, right? And, even back, you were talking about the skunk days, I always tell kind of newer anglers, I said, even on days you get skunked, you learn all kinds of stuff, right? Like how to deal with your gear, how to tie your knots. And so, even if you don't, I have to kind of believe the hard days, if you go out and just whack fish, I don't know that you learn a whole lot. but yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, if it was easy, I don't think any of us would do it. You know, I mean, the challenge is so good. There's days where there's fish all over the place and they're just not eating, and you want to crack the code so bad, and you're going through the box, or you're changing the leader, you're changing the retrieve. You're doing whatever you can to crack the code, and that those tough days when you're seeing fish but they're not eating really well, I think those are the most interesting, fun days there are.
Yeah, I would definitely not fly fish if it was easy, right? And I mean, for me, it's one of those things like I'm wound relatively tightly. and so and so for me, one of the things that attracted me to fly fishing was a problem I couldn't consistently solve. Um, because kind of in my work life, you just basically put more time and mental energy into it and you just crack the egg. And so that, yeah, I would 100% have zero interest in fly fishing if it was easy.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking, I have a lot of compassion for fish counters because they're going to be disappointed a great deal of the time because they're not taking the time to like look around. I mean, I mean, yeah, we all want to catch fish, and that's why we're doing it. But I would say the process and the buildup is what gives us all that gratification once we finally get a fish. And uh, very often while I'm on pole, I've got my camera dangling around my neck, and it's not a light camera. It's not an iPhone. I've got a DSLR with a 300 millimeter lens dangling around my neck very often, and and sometimes there's things that come up, and you got to let the camera do its job, and it allows you to express yourself, and then at the end of the day you show the picture to the client. You're like, you want a copy of it? This was your day. They might not have caught a fish, but they're getting a beautiful photo because we're taking the time to appreciate where we are. It's not just about ripping lips.
Yeah, it's interesting because on this trip I just got back from, we were fishing mice, and I think one night we were out until 3 a.m, and the other night midnight, and that is not a high probability game by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
Um, and so it's really kind of you might as well say you're trying to go out and catch lightning in a bottle. But it's interesting all the things that we saw in the sense of the wildlife and just the experience of being on the river in the dark. And I don't know, it's an interesting thing. And so I guess for me, I guess where I am on my fly fishing journey is I just want to be able to catch fish the way I want to catch them.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember a few years ago, I was in Belize, and we fished till like 7, 8 at night one night, and we decided to take the panga up the river directly to camp instead of going into town where we normally have a car pick us up. And we're going up the river, and it's pitch black, and the guide knows where he is. I'm like, we're in a zigzaggy, windy river. I have no idea what's going on. And then all of a sudden, the trees are lighting up on opposite sides of the river, and I'm like, what the? And we've got groups of fireflies in a tree on one side of the river lighting up an entire tree, and the fireflies across the river are answering them, flashing back at them. I mean, I mean, we didn't catch a permit that day. We didn't catch a single fish that day. I will never trade that experience of seeing the fireflies do that display. I would have rather seen those fireflies doing that than catch 3 permit that day. It was just incredible. Just an amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, they're experiences like that, and then you always have these really kind of interesting, kind of serendipitous encounters with other anglers and other people, right? Um, it's just always amazing, like whether you bump into them at the gravel barn in us after fishing all day and it's really, really cold because it's October or whatever it is, or you run into an old fishing buddy, but there are just all those little kind of colorful vignettes that happen that have really nothing to do with the fishing.
Yeah. Sometimes the best thing is you're out there fishing and, another guide friend, or you're out there, fishing not as a guide, but as just a sport. And you see another skiff and it turns out to be somebody and you wrapped up together and have lunch together. And, normally you're just kind of eating on the run or a quick 20-minute lunch, and you end up hanging out for an hour, boat to boat, just talking about the day, saying how beautiful it is and how great it is. And, it's kind of a wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so David, what is a typical day on the water like with you?
Well, I mean, we could sort of do day in the life of a guide, right? I wake up early. Well, actually, it all starts the night before, really. After a day of fishing, I have to make sure the rods are rigged and everything's clean. The flies aren't beat up from the day before or from that day. So I don't like to get things ready in the morning. I like to get things ready the night before. And then I'll wake up. I'll meet my client someplace, or I'll pick them up, slide the boat in the water after picking up lunch someplace or making it, and try to make sure if the clients bring their rods that they're rigged before they get on the boat. Because rigging a rod once you're on the boat means you're missing opportunities. So you want to have everything rigged at the car or at the trailer, and it each day is a little bit different, but you try to get into the flow of the day. You slip the boat in the water, you get in, you talk about expectations. If somebody's new to the game, what to expect, what they're going to be seeing, what they should be looking for. And you kind of go from there. And then you just try to start feeling out, the person on the bow, and see if they're understanding what you're talking about, if they're seeing the fish, and if they're not, and if people are open, there's sometimes a little bit of fly casting instruction or a little bit of fly casting help, and um, you fish until either the tide is doing something that is not, you know, is not going to help you. Maybe you'll stop. Sometimes you eat lunch at 10 in the morning. Sometimes you eat lunch at 2 in the afternoon, depending on the tide. Sometimes you're just, you're fishing through an entire tide and you're not eating lunch till the end of the day. But, you know, that's kind of how the day goes. It's kind of hard to explain. But, and then at the end of the day, it's, it can be the high fives and the thank yous, and you're airdropping photos from your phone to the other person's phone, and they're showing their appreciation or not, and get the boat back up on the trailer and go home, prepare, and do it all over again the next day.
Yeah.
It's not super exciting until you're the one who's on the bow of the boat.
You also told me, right, you only fish your flies, right?
For the most part, I do. There's a couple of flies I will buy, which occasionally I'll buy some crease flies, but I would say 90% of the flies that are used on my boat, I tie. I mean, if I look in my fly box right now, probably I can count on one hand the amount of flies that are not mine. And I've got a big box. Probably the 3 boxes I carry with me each have about 300 flies a piece in them, and most of the flies are exactly the same. I probably have 5 or 6 different patterns, but I vary them in size and color. And part of my day is in the evening. If I feel like I'm running out of particular color or hook size, I'll tie up. I'll tie up a few for the next day. Usually, I'll do that after dinner.
Got it. And, for folks that aren't kind of familiar with your fisheries, you want to kind of let folks know kind of the arc of your guide season?
I would say, as soon as the weather breaks, give it a little bit of time. But May through November, May through like early November. It used to be May through the end of October, and it would be like the end of May. But I've definitely seen a change in weather patterns and climate, and the seasons become longer, where I'm fishing earlier and earlier in May, and I'm fishing later and later in October or November, I should say. Um, and there are probably more open spots throughout the season where we don't find as big a density of striped bass as we used to. And again, that's not just a function of climate, but it's also a function of management of the resource, or as I like to say, mismanagement of the resource. Um, and we have three primary species we fish for here, which is striped bass, bluefish, and false albacore. And occasionally we'll, get a weak fish and some bonito. And early in the season, it's usually striped bass first, then bluefish come in shortly after. And false albacore usually are showing up either the very, very last couple of days of August or sometime in the first week or two of September. And we'll fish those. Last year, we were catching albies. I was getting albies till like November 5th last year, November 6th. And then we have our shoulder season, it's a big shoulder season here in the Northeast from November until May. But during that time period, if I'm not teaching skiing, I'm taking groups to Belize, Mexico, or the Bahamas hosting trips for tarpon, permit, and bonefish.
Sounds like a horrible existence.
Terrible. Terrible.
So we were talking when we were preparing for the interview about, how we see in fly fishing, it's such a powerful solvent and connector among people. And I was kind of curious on your thoughts about why you think that's the case.
I think fly fishing, it's kind of weird. Fly fishing is looked upon as almost like a cult-like existence or sport. When you tell people you fly fish, they're like, you're fishing in a river for trout, or you're whipping the rod around and catching fish. And a lot of people don't fully understand it, but when you explain it to them, they like it. But all the people who do fly fish, it's a kindred spirit. And it's not that unique, fly fishing. People come to me and say, well, I do regular fishing. And I'll be like, well, what's regular fishing? Well, I use a spin reel. And I'll be like, I don't think there's any such thing as regular fishing. There's spin fishing, and there's light tackle, and there's trolling and bait fishing and fly fishing. And I would contend that, fly fishing is maybe one of the earlier forms of rod and reel fishing. What could be more regular than that? But there's that connection with fly anglers, especially I think the ones who tie their own flies, which is very, very powerful. It's the people who fly fish I don't think they have a greater appreciation of nature and in the environment, but in many ways, I feel like very often they might be more connected.
I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that about tying, because I always kind of explain to people that even if you don't tie like seriously, like it's just another way when you can't get out on the water that you can kind of touch that thing that makes fly fishing so special to you.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of fly fishing as a way of expressing yourself, then fly tying is certainly a really good way to express yourself. Um, uh, my buddy Lu Yen and I have a wonderful little show called Masters of the Fly. Everyone go to mastersofthefly.com and see what we do. But we have fly tires. Come on. We have a lot of different guests, but we have fly tires come on, and they're so fascinating, and they're so connected. And when people are talking about the flies they tie, they can't help but talk about, the environments they're fishing the flies, and how to do it, and the places they've been to experience, how their flies work. It really it's really, really interesting. And we've had a lot of really good feedback from both the fly tyers and the people who've listened to the fly tyers, but just about their experiences and what they do. I know that when I'm sitting down and tying flies, I'm thinking about the fish I'm fishing to, but I'm not just thinking about the fish. I tie my flies to mimic a particular environment. So if I'm fishing a bottom that's got a lot of grass and a lot of green, my flies tend to be a little bit darker or a slightly different color pattern versus the flies that I use when I'm fishing over a sandy bottom, because the bait takes on the characteristics of the environment that particular bit of bait lives in. I know that when I'm fishing stripers are much lighter in color as well on a sandy bottom versus if I'm fishing stripers over eelgrass, where they'll be very dark and mossy in color. So all these things are taken into account when you're tying flies, and it's that understanding that, you know, that connection that we all have and we all see it, that makes it possible, you know, for us to relate to each other so well.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I really don't think you can be a really effective tyer and designer if you don't fish a lot, because I don't think you can really understand the fishing problems you're trying to solve unless you've actually experienced them.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the flies that I tie are really, they're not, I don't think they're super innovative. But what they are is they take into account color and size. And 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 you know, as you said, you know, when you're, you know, connected to the environment and you're seeing things, just adjusting color and size is sometimes all you need to do. Maybe I can tie deceivers, and I'll tie deceivers maybe a little bit different than the next guy, but I might tie them sparser, more dense. I'm using deceivers as an example. Sparser, more dense. Maybe use some synthetic materials in deceivers versus natural materials in deceivers, so I can mimic what I'm seeing. You know, maybe some, you know, deceivers that I tie have, you know, morphed into something that's not a deceiver at all, but it certainly was the genesis of what I was tying, or things like high ties. You know, you take those and you change them, and you change the color and the size, and you know, you do a high tie, and then you're like, well, I like this high tie, but boy, I bet if I throw some, make the high tie a full collar of high tie, and then I throw some feathers behind it, it'll give it a certain kind of action. And I'm going to fish it over this particular bottom, so I'm going to make it this color. And you know, things start to evolve, and 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 you can see how the fish are reacting to these things as you experiment with your fly tying and your colors and your size.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And for folks that aren't familiar, you want to tell us a little bit more about kind of what Masters of the Fly is and kind of its genesis, and then, you know, I know the next season is coming up soon. You know, what you have on tap for 2024.
Well, we don't. Well, I'll give you a couple of things that we're thinking about on tap. But Master of the Fly came out. My buddy Lou Yen and I were tying flies online during COVID, and we had a bunch of people. And Lou Yen actually invited me in on it, and then we started doing it together. And we were both of him and I were tying flies, and we had a whole bunch of us in the Zoom call. I think the first couple ones there were like 4 or 5 of us, and eventually there were like 15 or 20 of us. And we realized that there was something needed in the fly fishing community. So Lou and I started throwing around ideas of doing, you know, these Zoom casts, sort of a visual podcast, if you will, and then we started, you know, figuring out names, and we came up with the concept of Masters of the Fly, not because everyone's a master, and in fact it's just the opposite. Um, uh, it's to master something really has to do with being part of a community and finding joy from it. You don't have to be an expert to be a master. It's like being a Zen master. If you can, you can sort of master of your own domain, right? So we came up with Masters of the Fly. We came up with Masters of the Fly because we wanted to serve the community, the fly fishing community, with guest speakers and fly tires. We've had people. We've had the American Saltwater Guides Association, which has kicked off each season, and they're talking about the environmental issues and fisheries management and what they're trying to do to help keep fisheries alive. We've had Chris Wood from Trout Unlimited. We had Andy Mill, who's probably one of the greatest tarpon fishermen of all time. We've had Johnny King, who's a phenomenal fly tire, and there's a lot of people. I'm really hoping we get Joe Blados this year, who invented the crease fly, and a whole bunch of other things. Well, of course, we're going to have the American Saltwater Guides Association kick off our show this year, and the talk about that is probably going to be about the decreasing striped bass numbers, as well as tagging programs for false albacore, which we hold very near and dear to us, the false albacore. So, that's kind of Masters of the Fly in a very long, very big nutshell in what we do. But I go to the website. We've also done some content. There's a very funny one of me and Lou catching sharks on fly rods 2 years ago. There's another one of us catching bluefish. There's another one of me and Lou with one of our co-hosts, Eric Schatzker, where we're out striped bass fishing in shallow water. And of course, I'm the one on the pole, and Lou Yan and Eric are the lucky ones catching the stripers. So we do have some content on YouTube as well, but everything all of our past shows can be accessed through YouTube, and you can get to it through our website, Masters of the Fly. So, thanks for asking.
Oh, for sure. And I'll drop links to all that stuff and all the related social in the show notes. And, David, did you want to talk a little bit more for folks that aren't super familiar kind of about the conservation and fishery management issues? I know striper are a really hot topic. I know there's some management issues. I know there's some data issues, but you want to kind of talk a little bit more about that so our listeners will get a little bit better feel for what's going on?
I mean, we just had recently some horrible numbers come out on striped bass recruitment or spawn. It was the second worst. Second worst spawn, I think, since record keeping, and I can't remember the last really, really bad one. I think it was like 2012. That on top of overfishing the 2015 year class, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So we had a moratorium in the 80s into the early 90s on striped bass. They weren't allowed to be targeted. And the striped bass fishery came back, roaring back. If you leave something alone, it will really heal itself. So all the fisheries management people and all their wisdom pretty much forgot the lessons of the past. We had a limit of one fish at 38 inches, then it went to one at 36 inches, then they went to two at 28. And when they went to two at 28, things started to change. Now, most people did not recognize the change right away because there were still, lots and lots of fish out there. But within 5 years, I was noticing changes. And then cut to 3 years ago, they decided to create a slot limit and do a 17% reduction in the fishery. And I'm probably not getting this completely right, but a 17% reduction in harvest. And they said that would help bring the stocks back. But the problem was is that it'll help bring stocks back if recruitment, stays at a constant, which it wasn't. and the numbers have steadily been declining since 2015. So us at Masters of the Fly and the American Saltwater Guides Association, we're trying to put things out there through either letter writing campaigns or people going to hearings, to talk about what's going on, so that the managers at the ASMFC and would understand that we are concerned about this, and a robust striped bass fishery is super important, because so many people make their living either as guides, making money, that manufacturers who aren't even here in the Northeast, manufacturers as far away as Washington State, count on a healthy striped bass fishery to sell rods and reels. And there's hotels and delis, and there's primary, secondary, and tertiary effects of this fishery that are so very important, not just economically, but also culturally. So it's really, really important that we all fight for a healthy, robust fishery, which it is not right now. And we're at a crossroads, and we're all hoping, through our efforts, that something gets done, and it needs to be done in a hurry, unfortunately.
Yeah, and my understanding too is it's even, it's complicated by kind of poor management decisions in the past, poor
Yes.
data collection, which I know is something that, I interviewed Lu Yan and we talked about, how he's trying to help with that. But also, my understanding is that one of the challenges is that it's, there's a multi-jurisdictional management issue, because, the stripers are, from north of you all the way down to kind of where I am. And so you've got, not just commercial versus rec, but you've got all these different states and the federal government involved as well.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know why we call it fisheries management. It should really be called fisheries mismanagement. But we do. It's so complicated with all the different jurisdictions and everybody wanting their piece of the pie. And when it's all said and done, there's going to be no pie for anybody, because there's for it's hard to put into words, but it's everybody wants the same thing, but not everybody wants to make the sacrifice. It's kind of like the pay me now or pay me later scenario. Like, everybody wants to make the money now and catch the striped bass, and in both the biggest or the most or whatever. But then when they're saying, we don't need restrictions. But then when all these restrictions that have not been put into place finally come into place, or people are told they can't catch striped bass anymore, all the people, this is how I feel, though, all the people who wanted to be catching the striped bass, I feel like they're all going to have their hand out saying, well, why didn't you tell us this was happening? And now, I can't run my business anymore, and this and that, because, and I kind of say to those people, who weren't heeding the warning signs, those people were the those people were the cause of the problem. If we could have all just been on the same page, understanding, how to manage our fishery properly, we all could have had a nice piece of the pie and an equal piece of the pie. But now that's not possible any longer, and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about, kind of what clears things out when people have to roll up their sleeves and give something up or do a little bit of work, right?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with making a little sacrifice for a lot of gain further down the road. And not every day is going to be a wonderful day. Not every day you're going to have, get a ton of bass. Not every day is the fishery going to be open. And but that at least you're going to stay in business, and that you're going to wake up that first day in May when you can start fishing stripers and you know they're going to be there. I don't know they're going to be there next May. I just don't.
Yeah.
Um, I, uh, I mean, we had some fish this May and it was very nice, but had to work hard. There were not a lot of stripers on the sand. There were, people are catching, outside the Hudson and maybe the Chesapeake. They're catching a lot of big fish here and there. But I remember when I first started guiding, and even up until probably 7, 8 years ago, we'd be catching multiple year classes out of any given school of fish or out of any given day that we'd be pulling a flat. It's not that way anymore. It just isn't. It used to be. This is how maybe arrogant we all were in a way. I wouldn't let clients cast at a fish that was under like 27, 28 inches when I first started guiding. That's how many big fish we had in shallow water. I'd be like, hold on, don't cast at that fish. Wait, there'll be a really big one coming along that you get shot at, because if you catch this 26-inch dink right now and a 35-inch fish comes along, you're going to regret it. And maybe it was a way for me to appreciate the bigger fish or not. But now, it's like, I don't care at what size the striper is that swims along. I'm like, cast at it.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of the smallmouth fisheries around where I grew up in Virginia, where you see the same thing, where you go out and you spend a day on the water and you can see the holes in the classes because you're just not catching those fish at that size.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, and the problem there, there's some management issues, but it's also been that, during the spawn in the spring, we've had these scouring floods, and that just basically washes everything down. And knock on wood, luckily in the last 5 or 6 years, that's gotten a little bit better. So we're starting to see the recruitment come back, but not that dissimilar from what you're seeing, fishing for stripers now.
Yeah, and I mean it's such a thing. I know there's a lot of poaching. There's a lot of people whose subsistence live, and I feel for them, and they're probably going to take any fish they catch. You can't really blame them for it because they don't have a lot of money or resources or whatever, and they're going to eat whatever they catch. But there's a lot of people. There's a lot of charter boat captains, fly fishing captains who might take fish, but the people are there really to catch fish. I don't know if they're necessarily there to kill the fish. So it's just about re-educating the client and saying, you know what, come out, catch a striper, but we're going to put him back. We're going to put him back all this season. We're going to put him back all next season, because the season after that, we get to start keeping them again. I'm strictly a catch and release captain, and I have been since the day I started. And I've had people call me up saying, "Well, I want to bring a striped bass home. I'm hiring you for the day. I want to bring a striped bass home." And I'm like, "That's not who I am. You want to bring a striped bass home? It'll be in a photograph." And they're like, "Well, no, we want to." And I'm like, "No." And I'll say, "You want that? I'll give you the name of somebody who does it, but that's not what I do. I'm out here to use the resource, but not abuse it." And they respect it. They're disappointed because I got recommended to them, but that's not my thing.
Yeah. And David, before I let you go this evening, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, most importantly, if you are in the striped bass fishing community, make your voices heard. Say, hey, it's time to do something about the declining numbers of stripers, and speak up loud. Write letters, write your congressmen, senators. Get get a membership with the American Saltwater Guides Association. Do whatever it is that you need to do to preserve this fishery. It's super, super important. And there's a great app. Leanne developed a wonderful app. And what you can do is you can find out, it's called GotOne. And you can put all the stripers into your GotOne app. You go fishing and you log it in. And you can use your data of the fish you're catching and and I think the state of Massachusetts and some other people are using data from private anglers to help track fish and see what their numbers are. So I would say, download the GotOne app and use it and find out from GotOne how your data can be shared for science and research. It's super, super important.
Yeah, and I'll link back to my interview with Lu Yen, and you can learn, folks, you can learn everything about the app. And the cool thing about sharing the data is you're sharing it. The data is anonymized, so it's basically shared with the management agencies in 10 and 15 mile strips. So you're not spot burning.
That's right. You're not spot burning. It's just going to the scientists. They couldn't care less about what your spots are. They only care about the fish, how big they are, what tide they were caught on, what the numbers are, and the density. I'm a guide, and I use this app every single day. I do not have a care in the world about spot burning. It is completely anonymous.
Yeah, and rumor has it you're the most valuable beta tester.
Well, I've been finding some problems here and there with the app, and fortunately, I have a direct line to the creator, so we get it fixed really quick. But it's such a wonderful app. It's kind of incredible. It's one of the easiest apps to use. It's really quite self-explanatory, and if you use it, you'll figure it out right away.
Yeah. And so, David, before I let you hop, you want to let folks know where they can learn more about North Flats guiding and kind of follow your adventures on the water and on the slopes?
Sure. They can go for North Flats guiding, or you can just go to davidblinken.com or northflats.com, and you can find me there. You can find me on Facebook. And you might also be able to find me, I think, on the Hardy website is one of their pros. So that's the easiest way to find me. My phone number's on my website, so you can get me that way. And, feel free to email me. I love it when people email me just to ask me questions, even if they're not necessarily going to fish with me. I'm happy to engage in conversation. It's a lot of fun. I do what I do because I love it. It's my way of life. It's my lifestyle. It's who I am.
Yeah, very, very neat. And I'll drop links to all that stuff in the show notes to make it easy on everybody.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. This has been great fun.
Yeah, it's been tremendous fun. And, we'll tease this for folks. We've got a multi-part series that'll be coming up shortly that you'll start to see. So you'll get to hear a lot more from David in the future. But, David, I really appreciate you taking some time. Hopefully I caught you after dinner, maybe before fly tying for tomorrow, and we got to hang out a little bit.
Well, I only have 4 or 5 flies to tie tonight, Marvin. And all I got to say is, hopefully this gets you excited for striper fishing, because I hope to see you on the bow of the boat sometime next spring.
Yeah, that would be tremendously fun. I'll have to work on my seasickness, though.
You won't get seasick in a skiff. We're fishing flat water. You're rocking less in a skiff than you are in a canoe.
Well, sounds good. Well, listen, David, I really appreciate it.
All right, Marvin, thank you so much.
Take care. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Again, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. Be sure to head over to www.nor-vice.com to check out all the cool things going on at Norvice. Tight lines, everybody.